Hi everyone, I'm Mauricio Lauffer, SAP BTP domain lead, working with the customer success organization in SAP, so helping our customers in their BTP journey. So today we are going to be talking about the wdi5, which is an open source tool built by the SAP community for the SAP community. And with me we have Simon.
Hello everyone, I'm Simon. I'm a senior developer from J&S-Soft and I'm also one of the core contributors of wdi5. And with that, we want to start directly into the session. wdi5 version 3, faster, smoother, smarter. Last year at our DevToberfest session, we already spoiled at the end that we have a first release candidate for a new major release. And now we are finally at the point where we can finally ship our new major release, wdi5 v3, where we want to talk about it. Before we talk and show you the changes in wdi5 version 3, we want to talk a little bit about why we developed or started with a new major release. And the biggest root cause was for us the release of last year's WebdriverIO major release, WebdriverIO v9. So as you may know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel with wdi5. We want to use already existing tools, and WebdriverIO is already a very good end-to-end testing framework which introduced great best practices to test and automate your browsers. And on top of WebdriverIO, we built wdi5. So WebdriverIO is our foundation. And when we started developing and using wdi5, we always used the major release version 8. Last year was a new major release released, and this was v9. We looked into it and we saw that we had to refactor and change some things. And initially we thought this was quite straightforward, but we encountered some problems we finally resolved, and I want to talk about some of them at the start. Maybe let's have a look at the the blog post of the WebdriverIO team with the major changes and new features. And the biggest change or the biggest feature WebdriverIO introduced with v9 is the new WebDriver BIDI protocol. I will talk about it in a second shortly. Some of you may know you can use the WebDriver protocol to automate your test or automate your browser, and you can use the DevTools or could use the DevTools protocol to automate your Chromium browsers. Now there is a new protocol introduced, the WebDriver BIDI protocol, which more or less all of the big browsers are now implementing, and WebdriverIO is one of the first test frameworks which adopted this new protocol. But that's not only that, they also introduced that we can now use automatic shadow root piercing for our web components. Web components are also getting more and more important in our SAP world, especially in the UI5 development, as we here now also use web components and develop our own web components more and more. And we had the issue, or WebdriverIO had the issue to jump into the shadow root to really identify things. And with the version 9 of WebdriverIO, we are finally it's finally possible to do that. But not only that, we also have snapshot testing of web components now. That's very helpful to test your web components. There were not only new features, there were also some deprecations that came with WebdriverIO v9. And we also saw, when we looked at the documentation, that the so-called execute async function from the browser object is deprecated. And we internally heavily relied on this script because it was, let's say, the glue point to really let wdi5 do the thing. And the execute async script worked with callback functions, and this was now deprecated, and we should refactor everything to the execute script, which then worked with async await, and we had to refactor a lot of things, a lot of our internal scripts. Now, for what did we even needed this execute async script? Let's have a look here in a simplified way how wdi5 really identifies UI5 controls on our browser application. So on the left side, we have node context where we have defined our test scripts. For example, here we have two simple calls that we just want to identify two controls. Browser as control, that's how we identify it, and then a specific selector we all know. Now, when this command is fired, we use the execute async script to switch the context from the node context to the browser context. And inside of the browser context, we then can use the so-called record replay API, which does the major work of identifying our controls, interacting our controls, and making sure we only start interacting with our application when it is in a stable state. What is the record replay API? This is again something we did not reinvent. We just used already existing technology, and the record replay API was developed by SAP and is still supported by SAP because it is already used with OPA5. We can also have a look at the documentation of the UI5 demo kit. So this is now deprecated. We can have a look at the UI5 demo kit, and here we see if we simply search in the API reference for record replay, we see the documentation for that. And this is, let's say, the heart of wdi5. We are just using that record replay API, which helps us identify our controls. Here we have, let's say, the three most important functions we are under the hood using all the time. Let's start from the bottom. There's the wait for UI5. This is giving us the information if the application is in a stable state, that there are no asynchronous calls happening, that more or less all the animations are done, and then we can start with identifying the control. The next one, interact with control, one at the top, is that we can use a breath event, that we can enter some text inside of an input field, for example. And then, of course, identifying really a control is find DOM element by control selector. So we are using WebdriverIO as a base for our end-to-end test framework. And then with the help of the execute async script with the we used, and now while we refactored everything to the execute script, we switch to the browser context to get access to the record replay API, which then identifies our controls and then also interacts with our controls. Now, I already said also that with the new major release of WebdriverIO, there was a new protocol introduced, the new WebDriver BIDI protocol, which is also supported from the W3C standard. And some of you may now ask, what are even these protocols? How are even these browsers automated? And I just want to give you a short overview about that as well. Again, very simplified, as we don't want to get to so many details here. So how are today browsers automated? There are three major ways, or the first one is the WebDriver-based way, or the WebDriver-based protocol. Then there's an emulation-based way, so that the browser is emulated. And then there's the DevTools-based way. DevTools we may all know from the Chromium browser. So with the DevTools protocol, you can also only automate Chromium-like browsers like Chrome and also the new Edge. And for each of these different ways, how browsers can be automated, there are different automation or test frameworks which use the way. For example, for the WebDriver-based way, this is done in Selenium or, of course, in WebdriverIO. For the emulation way, there's, for example, Cypress. So Cypress used the emulation way. And for the DevTools way, there's Puppeteer, but Puppeteer is right now also going the WebDriver-based way. I think they're at the moment still refactoring things, but another test framework which uses the DevTools way is, for example, Playwright, which some of you may know. And now, what is the WebDriver BIDI protocol doing? And for that, let's have a look, first of all, how the WebDriver protocol currently is communicating with the browser or automates the browser. So we have in WebdriverIO so-called drivers. This is in the middle. For example, for our Chrome browser, we have the Chrome driver. For if we want to automate Edge, we have the Edge driver. Or Firefox, for example, uses the Gecko driver. And this driver, let's say, handles all the communication work for us. And it's all the time communicating with the browser. It checks that the browser is still available, that it still has the connection and nothing has failed. And then when we have our test script and say, hey, we want to identify something, we want to interact with the control, we also just communicate with the driver, and the driver then communicates with the browser. And this looks like that. And this is already a very good way and a very stable way to automate and interact with our normal browsers. There are some concerns that this is not the fastest way. In my opinion, it is fast enough, as you can also automate or parallelize different test scripts that they run in parallel. And yeah, it's fine. But there's now the WebDriver BIDI protocol introduced, and let's just say it's more or less the same. We still have a driver. For example, here we want to automate the Chrome browser. We use the Chrome driver. It's still communicating with it. But let's say we now have our WebDriver BIDI protocol, and it's on steroids. And this has now way more capabilities, and it's also communicating way faster with the driver, with the browser. And with that protocol, we can write faster tests, and we have more possibilities with our tests. We can go, or we can do more things with the browser. We can interact more with the browser. There's a great talk from Christian Broman. I can really recommend that to you, that you have a look at that. He is one of the core contributors of the WebdriverIO test framework, where he explains these things in more detail. So if you are really interested how these drivers work, how these automation protocols work, have a look at his talks. And with that, I would hand over to Maurizio, and he is now showing you the fun part, the live demo, where we show you what has changed and what has enhanced.
All right. So just one comment then on my part on wdi5. So I'm not part of the core team, but I have done some work extending and creating my own plugins for WebdriverIO. One of them is the key unit one that we have been using for Wi-Fi. And then because of that, I reached out to the guys and asked, oh, so do you need any help? Do you need anything that I can do? Is there anything that I can provide some support? So they kindly said, yeah, we have heaps of things that we can work on, we can improve on. So just look into all the issues that we have in our GitHub and whatever else, and go for it. So they gave me the option to, or the opportunity to go through and yeah, do whatever I wanted to do. So I started working in some of the, my opinion on the developer experience, that we could improve that a little bit. And then I will show this as we go. So I wanted to start just talking about some of the breaking changes or the deprecations that we have in this new version. So some of them we do believe that they shouldn't impact most of the users or most of the developers using WDI5, but we never know. So people use these in all different sorts. So just to be sure, we are deprecating the DevTools because of WebdriverIO v9. So DevTools has been deprecated, the package DevTools in there. So we are not using this anymore, and this is not going to work in the newer version, in v3 for WDI5. We are making base URL mandatory. So we do believe that most of people or all of people, they are using this property in their configuration today. But if they are not, so they will get an error when they launch the tests. And then last but not least is just to make sure that everybody is aware that the BIDI protocol is default by now. And if you want to use the classic one, it's possible, but then you need to explicitly say that in the configuration. So I will show an example in that one so we can go through. So just another comments before I start going into the code and showing a little bit of what we have done in there. Is just one of the things that we have improved, it's performance. So the performance has a major improvement in my opinion. And this thanks to Simon, the work that he has done in this one. So the very first release candidate for V3, we had a performance drop. So we had massive issues with performance in the first release candidate. So we had around 50% performance reduction for the tests. But now with V2, we had 20% improvement comparing to V2. So it's running faster. We can do more tests in less time. And hopefully when we get to release these, not just as release candidate, but the proper release, the final release for V3, we can get some extra performance in there as well. So two things that we have done as well is like the .env configuration has been removed from WDI5 because WebdriverIO does that by default. So what we had before was if you were using this .env configuration, the file would be loaded twice. So now it's going to be loaded just once because WebdriverIO will take care of that for us. So WDI5 doesn't do that anymore. So if you're using that, so probably you are going to get some 20 cents increase in performance as well because you're not loading twice. Then I think one of the main benefits that we're going to see with this version is that this version supports Wi-Fi legacy free. So if you are running V2 and you try to run tests for legacy free or Wi-Fi V2, it will fail. So V2 doesn't work for Wi-Fi V2 or Wi-Fi legacy free. So this new version that we're going to release for WDI5 will support that out of the box. So if you are creating new apps or testing new apps, you will also be able to start testing them with WDI5. Now, enough with just myself talking and you looking at my face. So I will share my screen and I will share some of the code and the improvements that we have done. And I will start by I think the best thing that we have done, and in my opinion, it's improving the TypeScript and the whole developer experience that we get from the TypeScript. I do believe that Mike, whenever he watches this session, he will be very happy to see all the TypeScript work that we have done. So we have simplified how we do the building. So we are still building for CJ and for ESM. So we're still building in a dual package way if you're using common JS or if you're using SM. So we're still being supported, no problems whatsoever. And then the main change that we will see, at least for the developers working with, and just a step back. So this won't affect who is using WDI5. This will affect people who want to contribute to wdi5. So the developers that want to be part of the project to write some code and improve wdi5, it should be easier, it should be better now with the better support for TypeScript. And the best example that we have is the codes or the modules that we have in the client side. So the client side, it's everything that runs in the browser context. So as Simon said before, we have some code running on the Node.js context, and then we have some code running in the browser context. So the client side before was everything CommonJS, no TypeScript for that whatsoever, no typing enforcing or no typing checks for that. But now we have the whole browser side in TypeScript as well. So this makes a little bit easier for us to understand what's happening, and especially to get some of the issues. So we get some benefits, and we could fix some of the bugs that we found based on the types that we are getting. So just to give you an example, this is when we inject the Wi-Fi. This is all the types that we have now, everything that you are checking. If you are checking the Wi-Fi version, then those are the types that we're using. This is what we are returning in the browser context. And then we can start looking into some of the changes that we have done for supporting Wi-Fi legacy-free. So we don't use globals anymore. We don't do anything that it's not V2 or Wi-Fi legacy-free compatible. So most of the developer experience then it's based on TypeScript, better support for TypeScript, better types, simplified modules, and some other minor things. But we had some codes that we had some complexity in there. We tried to simplify. We tried to make everything easier for us to understand. Then on the test side, we have some tests that they run straight on Node test runner, and then we do basically all the assertions and all the describing and the it blocks in Node test runner. Then this is testing some parts of the components that we have. And then majority of the components we test then straight with WebdriverIO. Let me just move the screen around, then I can see everything here. Just 1 second. So this is what we can find in the examples folder. So here in the examples folder, we also have done some changes in terms of the structure that we have. So before we have the tests being executed, and I would say almost in a random way. So for example, if you were trying to run the Cucumber, you'd start the server and start the test in one way. And then if you try to run the Fiori Elements tests, you may start in a different way with a different web server, with a different port. So what we tried to do now, we tried to just make that easier and follow the same structure. So basically everything will be executed with npm tests and whatever the workspace we have in there. And then in the workspaces, we will have something like this. So let me just get one example in here. This one. So we have the test is being executed in this way, or maybe let me get another one, which is going to be better, like this one. So all the servers or the web servers will be started with Wi-Fi CLI, our CLI, right? And in a different port. And then for the tests, we are going to run the tests. And if we have more than one test for that example, for that application, then we're going to run them in sequence, and then we start then one by one. So in this case, we have a couple of different tests being executed in here. But when I want to execute the tests, then I can just run npm test this workspace, and I will execute everything at once. So just making everything a little bit easier for the developers, because whenever we start working in here, we know what is expected, and then we understand all the examples without needing to deep dive into everything and try to understand everything, because they work in a different way. So it's going to be a little bit easier and simpler for us. Then just to show some examples now, I'm going to pick some extra tests that we have. So before we had the Cucumber, the Fiori elements, the wdi5, TypeScript wdi5, and that's it. So now we have some tests for CommonJS. So if you are loading everything in a CommonJS fashion, we have a test for that. If you are running in tests in ESM, then your ES modules will be guaranteed. We make sure that everything works fine. And then we have tests covering all the LTS versions for wdi5. So before we had some issues with this one. It was kind of working, kind of not working. And now we simplified that and everything works fine now, and we can test all LTS versions in one go in this one. So this is pretty much, if tomorrow we have a new LTS version, we'll just add this one here and then just make sure that we have that covered as well. Okay, so let me just run one test then. So let me just clear this one and I will test the CJS, for example. So this is basically what's going to happen. This is our CJS application here. So this is the test that we're going to run. So this is picking this configuration. That configuration has configuration for the wdi5 if you want to have this extra one. This is not mandatory, but this one is the mandatory one. So we have to have a base URL, so pointing to whatever you're running your server. And then we have the services, wdi5 in here, and where you're going to find the specs. And then everything in here is pretty much just regular WebdriverIO. And then in this one, because it's a CJS that we are testing, you can see that we're using CommonJS notation, right? Now, in terms of the code, this is the test that we have. So we have some mocks and some spies for some of the things, especially for the logger. So don't bother with this. And then let me just go. So those are the selectors for this first test. So just trying to open and close dialog. So this is making sure that you can find the filter, the button one, and then we press. So what we see here in terms of APIs is exactly the same, the ones that we have been using before. So nothing new, nothing different. Whatever test you have created, whatever test you have written before, they will just work. They won't change. So no problems. We don't need you don't need to be afraid of the changes in this one. As we said, the breaking changes are with the protocols and with that property that now it's required, this base URL one. Everything else should remain the same. Everything else should just works. Okay, so this one, we can see, let me just make this a little bit easier. So we can see the test has been started in a headless fashion, so we didn't see the browser running. It's just one worker because it's just one test file that we have in there. Then we see some logging coming from the browser, and then we see everything that has been executed, everything that is being logged in the wdi5 here is mostly coming from the browser. And then we have the reports saying this is what we have been tested. And then those are the tests and they passed. Pretty much that's it. So nothing new here. If you want to change the report, it's possible. If you want to use whatever features we have in WebdriverIO, that's possible. No problems whatsoever. So now if you want to use the classic protocol, you need to make a change, and then I'll just show you. So this is the application for testing the classic protocol. Configuration here is pretty much the same, nothing new. Then the tests themselves, pretty much the same, nothing new. So this one, the only difference is that we are using ES modules. And then if you look into the BIDI configuration, we have, let me just find this one. We have this entry here, which is required to enforce the WebDriver Classic protocol. That's the only change that you need to do. So for example, if I have my test today in wdi5 v2 and it's using the classic protocol, and I want to migrate to V3, and for whatever reason, I want to use the classic protocol, then I need to just come in here and add this property. That's it. Nothing else. You don't need to change anything else in your tests. You don't need to change anything else in the application. So it should be quite straightforward. And then if we want to test this one, then let me just go and run this one. And then same as the one before, nothing new in here, nothing different. It's just we're going to see pretty much the same results in terms of execution. Then another change that we have done, and this is not really from our side, is more from the WebdriverIO side, is that you can pass some properties and some headers whenever you have the changing the URLs. And then the basic authentication is also part of this configuration now. So again, from users consuming wdi5, this doesn't change. You don't need to change anything. But then for us, when we are working on maintaining wdi5, then we have this basic authentication happening in a different way now. And then I think that's pretty much the things that we have changed. Again, we have for sure a lot of other changes, a lot of minor changes in the tests themselves and into our coding here in our main modules, but I won't bother you with all the details. They are open source, so you can go through. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself, to Simon, to Volker, and to the amazing team supporting wdi5. And I think that's pretty much that.
All right. With that, I think we are at the end of our session. Thank you for watching. We hope that the real release is hopefully soon there, that you can not only use the release candidate, but yeah, just use the major release. And one last thing I want to say is, if you want to support wdi5 like Mauricio did, just reach out to us. This is a community project, as he already said, by the community, for the community, and everyone can contribute. And if you just need some help with onboarding, showing you things and the setup, just reach out to Mauricio, me, Simon, Volker, and so on, and we are happy to help you. And with that, I hope you have a nice rest of the Devtoberfest. Enjoy all the other sessions, and see you soon, hopefully.
Thanks all.